一路建设要聚焦发展。
On today's World Insight with Tian Wei, half a decade of Belt and Road Initiative, the milestones and the global impact. And U.S. tariffs on another $200 billion worth of Chinese goods on public hearing. What are the chances of working on the differences? Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. This year marks the 5th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative. 5 years on, the BRI has doubled down on efforts to build a trade and infrastructure network connecting Asia with Europe and Africa. Earlier today, Chinese President Xi Jinping emphasized that China will continue to seek maximum common ground with BRI partners. What's the bottom line for BRI, and what about the future road of the BRI? Let's see what our panelists have to say. But before that, let's take a look at this first.
From concept to reality, covering more than 65 countries, connecting 63% of the world population, contributing about 30% of global GDP. Over 5 years since Chinese President Xi Jinping first came up with the Belt and Road Initiative, its early successes are exciting and encouraging. Since 2013, China has invested more than $60 billion in countries along the Belt and Road. To help boost cooperation, China has established more than 80 overseas economic and trade cooperation zones, providing more than 244,000 local jobs. The China-Europe Express Freight Rail Network, linking 48 domestic cities with 42 European cities, has expanded greatly and boosted trade and investment. Early on Monday, President Xi Jinping said the BRI had met the demand for change in global governance, and the project delivers on a commitment to a community with a shared future, emphasizing the sharing of both rights and responsibilities.
The practice of 5 years has proved that the construction of the Belt and Road is in line with the trend of the times and the direction of historical development. International recognition is growing, more and more partners are involved, and the initiative's influence continues to expand.
More than 2,000 years ago, the ancient Silk Road was a game changer in forging economic and cultural ties between China and other nations. And in modern times, greater diversity in different civilizations. In the 21st century, when the world is facing new challenges, the Belt and Road Initiative is expected to take that spirit of trade and cooperation to new heights, to build a shared future for humanity.
For more on the 5th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, let's turn to our panelists. With us in Beijing, Zhang Jianping from Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation with the Ministry of Commerce. In Rio de Janeiro, we have Charles Tang, Chairman of the Brazil-China Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And in Moscow, Russia, we have Alexander Lukin, Professor and Director of East Asian and SCO Studies at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Congratulations, 5 years effort of BRI. But Mr. Tang, let me begin by asking you, how important is it that China and its partners working on BRI will make sure, as President Xi Jinping today pledged, that it should benefit more to the local people where the projects are going on?
The BRI initiative is a very, very bold and visionary project which will affect the lives of hundreds of millions of people in over 65 countries. And it goes well in the spirit of the Chinese win-win international relations policy, where instead of sending Marines, China sends its business executives and entrepreneurs to trade and do investment. And of course, China will also gain from this initiative, but in the same manner that China changed the continent of Africa from a lost continent into one of hope and development and prosperity, it will do the same for more than 65 countries along and around the route of the BRI initiative. And the extended BRI initiative is already taking shape in many, many of the important ports in Latin America. For example, we're building a major port in the north of Brazil.
I see.
To facilitate the transportation of foodstuff and products between China and Brazil.
Yeah.
On the west coast of Chile, on the Pacific, there's a major port being planned to facilitate all the grains from Argentina going to China.
Well, Mr. Chang, it's wonderful to hear all of these wonderful projects going on, but you haven't answered my question directly, which is how to benefit the people, the local people particularly, where the BRI projects are. That's what Chinese President Xi Jinping today pledged, in fact, but the question is how?
Well, with the development and the connectivity, you know, many of these countries were isolated geographically, and with the massive investments on the BRI project, the economic movement will take shape, economic growth and prosperity will be installed, and of course the people will have benefits with more business, more jobs, and more economic activity.
Well, this is supposed to be win-win. Mr. Zhang, on the other hand, how big a win for China? How big a win for the other partners that are working with China on the BRI projects? That's a question being asked by some.
Generally speaking, actually international trade and international investment within those BRI countries are very important for their development. If you look at the big data in the past 5 years, actually bilateral trade volume within China and those BRI countries already achieved $5.5 trillion. Every year, $1.1 trillion. And the investment in the past 5 years, the Chinese side actually accumulated investment in BRI countries about $80 billion. And then those, BRI projects can provide so lot of job opportunities for those residents in host countries. Estimated about 240,000 jobs in those countries. Thus, industrialization and infrastructure improvement promoted those BRI countries' development.
But Mr. Zhang, one of the things we need to really mention in the program that there have been some complaints suggesting that the Chinese workers are working on the Chinese projects sponsored by the Chinese side that are working as the BRI joint initiative in some of those countries. Some have this complaint. Of course, we are not saying it's representing the whole picture. But the question, once again, is how to let the local people benefit, while at the same time, this is going to be a win-win both for China and where the countries are, the BRI projects.
Yeah, actually, you mentioned, I think that this type of saying and understanding just a part of picture inside of, full picture. Let me give you an example. That is when Chinese side, actually constructed a railway in East Africa countries. In that progress, actually, we provided so lot of job opportunities for those local workers. In China-Pakistan economic corridors, when we construct railway and road, from Chinese side, we provide training courses for those local workers, local engineers. Also, we dispatched those local workers and managers to China, accepted training courses, and then a lot of local people actually get their working skills in that process.
I see. Well, these are examples, certainly, Mr. Zhang. You say it's very much on the positive side. Having said that, though, Mr. Lukin, whether it is a training project, it is the funding for the infrastructure projects, it is a lot of money. So the question is whether there's going to be sustainable provision of funding for these projects that are happening around the world, if you look at the vision of the BRI for the future. Professor Lukin, as an ex-scholar working on China-related subject from Russia, how do you see that question?
Well, it's not an easy question, because as far as I know, Chinese own railways don't bring any commercial benefit to China. They are all subsidized by the government. So of course when you do it abroad, there's a question who is going to pay for it. Now, for example, Russia and China are in talks about building a high-speed railway from Moscow to Vladivostok, or it's probably going to be the longest, one of the longest in the world. But even its preliminary stage from Moscow to Kazan, about 1,000 kilometers, there are long discussions about who pays for what and is it going to be profitable. So the main thing that if such big projects can be profitable, because we know that China, of course, is a generous country, but it also wants to benefit from various projects. And because of China's internal problem, it's not at the position now to pay for everyone.
Well,
but generally, by the way, I would say that I would look at this project. Actually, there are two projects, Belt and Road projects, and we are in Russia are mostly interested, of course, in the Silk Road one, because it has to do more with the continent, with the Eurasian continent. I would look at that from the point of view of geopolitics, not that much economics, because it's interesting that China is promoting new ideas and shows probably an alternative way of development to the entire world. Now it's not only, there is not only Western model, but also Chinese model of development, and not only on China, but also of some neighboring countries. And of course, it's of course going to benefit many people in neighboring countries, but also not everybody in the world are happy that there is another strong economic model. So there's also some criticism of the project in the world, of those two projects in the world.
Professor
of course, sponsored by the United States and those countries.
Professor Lukin, you brought up several interesting points. Let's handle them one by one. Mr. Zhang, I need to have some direct answer from you about that, because what Professor Lukin said is very true, that this is going to be a win-win situation when China officially initiated or proposed the Belt and Road Initiative, and therefore having all the partners to join from all over the world. China will be one of those winners. China is not going to be the losers of it, and therefore the projects that are being done has to be sustainable, it has to be financially viable, and it's going to be also important infrastructure projects. It's going to create more economic prosperity in the home countries where those projects are. So, Mr. Zhang, that is quite a challenging question. Everybody needs to be a winner.
In my view, actually, BRI is a new type of trans-intercontinental economic cooperation platform on which actually international cooperation and development, that will be the main topic. And then, today we are at the age of globalization and regional economic cooperation, even if integration. So in that process, actually, global value chain can play a very important role. So today, if you look at cooperation on BRI, that's not, I don't think that's a zero game. Actually, today we can benefit each other. We can promote our complementary, economic relationship. And then, for some of detailed, things. For example, just before, the Russian friend mentioned, the railway between China and Europe. And some of them today can get benefit, but some of them still need to get, governmental subsidies. But I think that's in short term. But in the long run, if we can, explore a more detailed, business model, and we can link more countries along the routes, gradually we can get benefits. On the other hand, I like to say that yes, he's right. That is actually BRI. Not only China's model, as well as the Western model. actually we can combine,
Right.
both, Western model and the Chinese model. We can promote, bilateral cooperation plus,
Right.
Multilateral cooperation, and then we can have, new, development model for global governance and regional governance.
There are a lot of possibilities that could arise from the BRI platform, as you said, sir. Mr. Tang, therefore, I want to have your comments on this as well. There seems to be a tendency of impatience and a tendency of skepticism before thinking about the solutions once we have new ideas in the world. For example, this one initiated originally from China and some of its partners, Belt and Road Initiative. People could just talk very sarcastically about the idea without providing any other alternatives of future growth of the world. And therefore, Mr. Tang, when we have an idea like this, we will have an idea being tested at its very initial stage, what is the right way to look at the pros and the cons, and the right way to come up with the best solutions to the current challenges? Mr. Tang.
Well, I think that it's a visionary and bold initiative that will create prosperity and development. China's win-win policy has created prosperity and development in many parts of the world. I use the African example. When China started investing massively into the infrastructure of Africa, which transformed the continent from a lost continent to a continent of hope, there was also a lot of criticism and skepticism. So, and if we measure in terms of economic gains, the railways and the initiative will pay for itself many, many times over. Not only the road, land BRI, but also the maritime BRI. The economic movement, the economic gains, the development and the prosperity that this massive project will encourage will be extremely compensating in terms of economic investments. The return on investment will be manifold. Of course, we're not talking within the next year, but in the medium term, the economic activity and prosperity will more than pay for the initial investment.
Right. But also the important question is, Professor Lu King, whether the private sector and different kinds of players will be interested in the project, that they will join in so that it will become a project for everyone. We heard Professor Lu King, for example, Citibank, it is having its own branch working from Beijing on the issue of Belt and Road Initiative. That, of course, is an international investment bank. On the other hand, would there be more players just like that from the private sector joining in? How important is it that these forces will be geared up and they will become an instrumental part of it, just besides the government input? Professor Lu King.
Well, I agree with that. Russia needs infrastructure. I remember when I first went to China, this was early 1980s, China lacked roads and, the railways were very bad. And I actually thought that the Soviet Union at that time was a more developed country. But now I just envy China, because I go by Chinese fast trains, I see these Chinese highways, and I really envy your country. And I think that if we have something, if we can build something like that with China's money or with China's help, or with cooperation with China in Russia, it would be very good for Russia. The problem is that we need to find some, means of financing and some mechanism of some mechanism for that, and I hope we are doing this. By the way, Russia is developing cooperation with Silk Road Economic Belt project within the framework of agreement between Eurasian Economic Union and Silk Belt. This was an agreement signed in 2015 between first it was a declaration between Russia and China, and then the Eurasian Economic Union. It's an economic organization with 5 members, 4 more than Russia and 4 other former Soviet republics, And we are developing this cooperation together, all 6 countries. So this is very important not only to Russia but to other members of Eurasian Economic Union. Last year a specific agreement was signed with China on specific projects and terms of cooperation. Actually it was this year, not last year.
It seems that there are new models that are coming out as to the kinds of cooperation that countries, different sectors, and also players could have on the general platform of BRI. Before we go, Mr. Zhang, I want to have your comments about that one question, important as well. That this is China, very new learner, in fact, about international governance, trying to work out a kind of platform with the rest of the world about development, connectivity. BRI is certainly one of those. The earlier 5 years, what has it taught China and the rest of the world about what China wants? Mr. Zhang, briefly.
Yeah, actually China's initiative just is China's recommendation and suggestion. Actually, we hope to provide a new cooperation platform on which more and more countries can create new global supply chain and production network, and all of countries can work together in order to promote development and cooperation. And then, of course, we hope that we can achieve sustainable development targets in 2030. So in this regard, I think that BRI is a new platform for global development.
All right. Zhang Jianping, Charles Tang, Alexander Lukin, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And you are watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. Public hearings on proposed U.S. tariffs on another $200 billion worth of Chinese goods underway. What are the chances on working on their differences? That discussion and more about the realities and future of China-U.S. relations right after this break with Dr. Chun Li. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. China and the U.S. have levied another round of tariffs on each other's goods. A public hearing is also underway in Washington over newly proposed tariffs on even more Chinese products. Business and industry leaders are increasingly alarmed on the worsening trade tensions between China and the United States. The results of the hearing will be announced next month, but no matter the outcome, many say it's likely to have a negative impact on China-U.S. relations. Let's take a look at this first.
U.S. duties on an additional $16 billion worth of Chinese goods have taken effect, despite grumblings from the U.S. business community. The U.S. government recently released details from the public hearings on the Section 301 tariffs last month. 76 of the 82 representatives were against the tariffs. They believe China has an irreplaceable role in the global supply chain, with significant expertise in many areas. If American businesses are forced to replace their suppliers, it would eventually harm their interests and American consumers. Another round of public hearing is underway on proposed tariffs, this time on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. Some businesses say the U.S. consumers would feel the pain in the end.
Only by international cooperation, the consumers can get, qualified services, good products, and a reasonable price. If you leave tariffs.
President Trump is trying to pressure China into changing what he calls its unfair trade practices that harm the U.S. China denies this and insists it's open to free and fair trade. Meanwhile, some experts say that China's continued opening up of its markets is the way forward, despite what looks like a long drawn-out trade battle.
For more on China-U.S. trade tensions and the general reality and potential of U.S.-China relations. We are joined here in the Beijing studio by Dr. Chun Li from the John Thornton China Center from the Brookings Institution. Sir, welcome to our program. It's such a pleasure to have you in Beijing. Dr. Li, my first question to you is whether the Trump administration is using this trade war as a way to distract the tensions from his ever-building legal cases, or this is in fact reflect the strategic goal the U.S. is having as a whole against China. Dr. Li.
Well, I think neither. First of all, that the trade issue, tariff issues, is not in the spotlight. It's maybe in China, it's people are very much concerned about that. But for the United States, I think the headline news is still the other issues about immigration, about the Donald Trump scandal, and about the economic structure change. These are actually far more important. And the reason that I also would not say that it's a part of a strategic goal is because, first of all, I don't think Donald Trump or American government has really well thought the strategic objective about China. I think that there's a concern or sentiment that China's U.S. policy or strategic approach based on engagement now has some problem they want to review. I think this is one thing, but already have a containment or strategic objective to use trade and security and political and even educational, science and technology fronts against China. I think that's probably is not accurate. Now, these issues all occur at about the same time, and also the trade disputes occur at the same time with the American strategic adjustment toward China. So give the people the impression, especially people in China, there's a kind of a strategic change, shift on China. Well, but the reality is I think America is still in the search for a sound policy or strategy towards China.
Well, many here, Dr. Li, actually are very suspicious about what you have just said, because if you look at the two white papers published at the end of last year, certainly suggesting this administration and together with the Capitol Hill seem to have China as the strategic rivalry, quote unquote. That's the exact word. So don't they mean what they said?
Well, not necessarily, because if you look at this as a grand strategy, it has some flaws. First of all, when you have a strategy, you should have the priority. You should not make too many enemies, but that report certainly lay out 3 major groups of enemies. And also, you should be flexible, and also should, if China does this, we will do that. And thirdly, you should have a means to meet your end. In all these areas, we do not see that much. So this could be just some of the people just think that as China becomes strong, and also that the United States experience some difficulties, I mean, both at home and abroad, there's a need to have a kind of strategic paper about China. But I don't think it's a well thought grand strategy. I think that people in Washington, D.C. actually quite cynical about that. I understand from China's perspective, they think this is like a real thought of things. But sometimes this may be to do with American politics rather than to do with the U.S.-China relations. So, of course, you can be suspicious. I think most people in China are suspicious. But I just want to tell you the sentiment in the Washington, D.C. We wish to have a good strategy towards China, but this one is not like that.
But Dr. Li, one of the things that people take note is that it used to be the practice that different administrations, starting from Carter all the way down to the one before Trump, mainly used the approach of engagement with China. You could argue that maybe at the end of the Obama administration things have changed a bit, but now you see more and more approach similar to containment, which has been the practice used during the Cold War, is now being used toward China, or at least in verbal way. Dr. Li, that makes a lot of people here in China concerned about what exactly the U.S. is heading for.
Well, it's not so easy to abandon the engagement policy, despite there's a lot of concern in the United States. Some are legitimate, some probably based on wrong assessment, sometimes more to do with American politics, as I just mentioned. And if it's really not engagement, is that really right to contain China? Is that already too late? and whether we can get international support, and there's a lot of issues. And I think that at the moment that some of the American scholars also raised a concern, and I think there's different views. And to have the tough policy toward China, want China to meet international norms and the standard in terms of trade front and also in other front is one thing. To have all-round containment policy against China is quite another thing. And I think that despite all these concerns or tensions, I think now probably more than any time before, there's a more frequent visit, deeper exchanges on many fronts, and the head of state and military to military think tanks. It's not closed yet. Of course, some people want to close the door and the windows, but so far, at least, so far, the windows and doors are open. And also, we talk a lot of tensions, but we should not forget there are a lot of common interests, climate change, and anti-terrorism, and global warming, and most importantly, as the two largest economies in the world, we have a lot of shared interests. And the bottom line is, neither China and the United States want to have a war against each other.
Well, since to talk about scholars, particularly those scholars who have been researching about China for a long time, let's take a look at what they are having in mind. Not just you, Dr. Li, but every one of them. The U.S. magazine Foreign Affairs recently published the results of a survey among a broad pool of experts on China-U.S. relations. Take a look at what they have to say. Participants were asked to state whether they agreed or disagreed with the proposition U.S. and Chinese national interests are fundamentally incompatible. 34 experts expressed their opinions in total. 2 strongly agreed with it. 12 agree, 5 are neutral, 12 disagree. 3 strongly disagree. So basically, the experts are somewhat evenly split. I understand that Dr. Li yourself strongly disagree, together with 2 other scholars, mainly of Chinese origin. But many question this evenly divided picture. It is already very different from the earlier sentiment that many of these names are quite optimistic about China-U.S. relations earlier.
Well, this divide reaffirm what I said earlier, because there's no consensus yet in the United States. There are a lot of concern, a lot of criticism, but also there's more criticism of Donald Trump's foreign policy, and whether it be Russia and North Korea and Iran and also China. So I think that the China study community, along with the U.S. strategy thinkers, still yet reach agreement. So at the moment, I think it's fair to say we are more concerned about Donald Trump rather than China. So that chart, the divide, really reflects the pluralistic views of China. So that gives us some, ideas that how, from China's perspective, can work with the international community, with China's scholars, with the international relations scholars, to really avoid the confrontational situation.
Is there a way?
Well, of course there's a way, because one thing is for some people talk about China, you should open up the market, but I think very few people in Washington and in Wall Street really want to have the all-round trade war with China. So I think there's tremendous room for change. I think China is the largest economy. China has a huge domestic market. Chinese government will do a lot of policy adjustment. These are all very important.
But you talk about the elites in Washington are very concerned about the Donald Trump himself as the president, rather than quote-unquote a rivalry from China. But China also thinking the same way. China is extremely concerned about Donald Trump because he has been using this practice of, in a way, domesticating international relations policies for his own political benefits. If you look at whether it is the DPRK issue, the Singapore summit is mainly a photo op for him. And if you look at the Iran issue, if you look at the immigrant issue, Dr. Li, should we be concerned that President Trump is likely to use U.S.-China relations as a tool in his hand for his domestic political support?
Well,
and how dangerous is that midterm election following?
Well, it's almost for sure that Donald Trump will link his foreign policy to his personal leverage and also legacy at home, but also try to avoid some of the scandals that he's still under investigation. This is, I think, it's a good assessment. But he can go to 2 different directions. he could be very tough on China, or he could make people to know that his engagement with China. Now, I use the term engagement, but actually last year there's two major meetings in Florida, and then his successful trip from his perspective, and also from Chinese perspective, the visit in Beijing. So he can turn around. So we do not know which way he will go. I hope that he will do the right thing, not just use China and as an enemy and to unite the people or derail or distract the domestic attention.
But are some of the latest events really helping us to understand things are going to the positive direction? First of all, the preparatory negotiation taking place in Washington just a few days ago between the Chinese and the U.S. side for the likely November multilateral meeting when the two presidents meeting one another, if President Trump is still in the office. It's not necessarily being termed as extremely successful. And secondly, you see the hearing that is going on in Washington about the possible $200 billion tariffs likely the U.S. going to impose on the Chinese imports, also going to directions that there is a division of opinion, Dr. Li, between the business leaders, which are suggesting tariffs is not the way to go, and the Trump administration, which is quite determined about this 200 billion. So not many recent events helping us to be positive.
Well,
are there?
No, that's true, and it's also more to do with the domestic politics in both countries. And I think that first of all, that the recent negotiation is a low level. Usually, you do not expect there's a breakthrough, but we do not know behind that. They certainly could pave way for high-level meeting. At a certain point, both countries should realize that we cannot let this kind of thing continue forever. Some of the deal should be made. I think they will do that. But at the moment, I think we should not be too optimistic, because there's a divide in the United States. America is very divided. And Donald Trump really strongly believes that he did not get whatever he asked. That again, this is related with his campaign method. The last year, you thought that probably he will reduce the economic, trade imbalance, but actually trade deficit increased by $28 billion US dollars. So to a certain extent, he may have legitimate concern, but also Chinese have legitimate concern, because partly sounds like Donald Trump is so greedy and so unpredictable. So, and also you have difficulty to negotiate with them. At the same time, you find that the trade issues come along with a strategic shift. And especially some political leaders push really the bottom line, the red line of the Chinese government is about the Taiwan. And also you mentioned about a strategic report. These all add the difficulties. And besides that, there's a less leverage for Donald Trump to play around in terms of North Korea situation. China already improved the relationship with North Korea. These will add to the situation. But no matter what, I think that you imply Donald Trump may be impeached. I think this is a very unlikely scenario, and because of American politics. And I think that most likely there will be summit in November. And also there will be more meetings. I think very important, we should understand, the top two leaders could anytime make a phone call. I think the other side will pick up a phone call. That's very, very important.
We hope those phone calls will happen. We hope those phone calls will happen, and those information can be shared to the public.
Absolutely.
Having said that, though, you see China and the United States are at very different stage of their development if you look back at their history. China is very eager to be a player in perfecting the current international system, including the international trade system. The U.S., however, had been demonstrating, at least through this administration, of withdrawing from many of those systems and platforms. And therefore, the question is, how is this international, in a way, discussion, if not debate and fight, likely to be impacted on the bilateral relations, not now, but for the midterm and even the longer term? And what kinds of danger and challenge does that impose on the bilateral relations?
Question.
Dr. Li.
The danger is you ask other countries choose a side. I think this will go back to the Cold War time. I don't think that it will happen. And I'm sure that many countries in South America and Africa really don't want to do that. And maybe also they think China is a part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Now, European countries, they may have a similar concern in terms of American Western values and etc. But on the trade issues, they disagree with Donald Trump. And also, they have the different game to play with China. And ultimately, China provides also great opportunities. So you do see the tensions or differences between many other countries. But I think one of the things is to ask this country to play around. But of course, these are all linked. I think China uses its own leverage, its huge market. And it's also, China is already catching up in many different areas. I think the important thing is that you mentioned about the China and US and the different development stage, which is true, but it's also true China is catching up very quickly. Like in the areas of AI, artificial intelligence, China, according to many experts, is already ahead of the United States, or just a couple of years to catch up. So that we should also keep that in mind. And China's middle class, despite the recent tensions or anxieties, by and large, it's developed very fast. But American middle class is shrinking. And so, again, we should put that into perspective.
I see.
Of course, we will have some difficult time, but also I think this gives us some kind of sober lessons. The countries should work together. And yes, we have differences, but of course, we should not forget.
Sober lesson is really the phrase to be used here. Before we go, very quick answer from you. What about that 200B? Is it likely to happen? What does that mean, Dr. Li?
Well, sometimes Donald Trump even have an even higher number on that. I think that China is willing to compromise. I think President Xi Jinping already mentioned in the Davos speech that China wants open market. But the thing is, it's not just endless. It should have a clear, it should mutually, based on mutual agreement. So, and also should not just look at the trade issues, you also should link to some other issues.
Right. Well, we'll see how things would move from here, but definitely a great talk with you, Dr. Chun Li from the Brookings Institution. Really appreciate it, sir.
Same here.
And I hope you'll come back to the studio once you're traveling to Beijing once again. Thank you. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Goodbye.